Freedom always sounds loudest 5 seconds before you lose it. That was the thought pounding through my head as I slipped barefoot across the cold marble floor at exactly 2:07 a.m. Every heartbeat echoing louder than the grandfather clock ticking somewhere inside the mansion behind me. I had spent 23 days pretending to accept my new reality, smiling when the house staff greeted me, thanking the chef for dinners I barely touched, reading books in the enormous library while secretly memorizing every hallway, every security camera, every shift change, every blind corner. Vincent Moretti believed I had stopped looking for a way out. That was exactly what I wanted him to believe. Outside, a light rain drifted through the gardens, soft enough to blur the security lights into glowing halos. The air smelled like wet cedar and fresh-cut grass, and for the first time in weeks, I could almost remember what normal felt like. My backpack rested lightly against my shoulders, carrying nothing more than a wallet, my driver's license, a phone I had finally managed to recharge, and a faded photograph of my parents. Everything else could be replaced. Freedom couldn't. I counted my breaths as I crossed the stone path leading toward the eastern gate. 6 guards usually rotated through the property overnight, but tonight only 4 were visible. One had stepped inside minutes earlier for coffee. Another was making his routine inspection around the garages. I had watched this pattern repeat every night since arriving here. It was predictable, human, fallible, exactly what I needed. My fingers trembled as I reached the keypad hidden behind a climbing rose bush. Weeks ago, I had watched one of the groundskeepers enter the code while believing no one was paying attention. I still remembered every number. The keypad beeped once, then twice. A soft mechanical click answered me. My pulse exploded with hope. The iron gate slowly began to swing open. I almost laughed. It had actually worked. Every warning Vincent had given me echoed through my memory. There are people outside these walls who know your name now. Staying here is safer. I had dismissed every word as another method of control. Powerful men always found beautiful ways to disguise cages. I wasn't going to become another possession displayed inside his perfectly organized world. I stepped beyond the gate. Cold rain kissed my face, and I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom for the first time in weeks. Then headlights quietly illuminated the empty road ahead. A black SUV sat parked beneath an old oak tree as though it had been waiting for hours. The driver's door opened before I could take another step. Vincent climbed out wearing a charcoal overcoat over his tailored suit, one hand resting casually inside his pocket, rain collecting in his dark hair without seeming to bother him. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look surprised. His calm expression unsettled me far more than shouting ever could have. Those steady blue eyes met mine across the rain-soaked driveway with the certainty of someone watching the final scene of a movie he'd already memorized. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth as he checked the silver watch on his wrist before lifting his gaze back to me. "You're late, Claire," he said quietly. "I've been waiting for you." For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Rain gathered on the shoulders of Vincent's overcoat, while tiny drops slid from the iron gate I had fought so hard to open. I searched the road behind him, hoping another car might appear, hoping this was somehow coincidence, but the empty highway stretched into darkness with no headlights except his. My carefully planned escape had ended before it had truly begun. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay steady. "Did you put a tracker on me?" I asked. Vincent shook his head once, almost amused by the question. "No, Claire." His calm answer irritated me more than if he had laughed. "Then how did you know?" He glanced toward the open gate before looking back at me. "Because tonight made the most sense." The words settled heavily between us. He spoke as if predicting the weather instead of my every decision. I folded my arms against the cold. "You do not know me as well as you think." His expression softened in a way I still could not understand. "You always pack light when you are afraid. You always wait for rain because fewer people pay attention during storms. And every evening this week, you spent exactly 15 minutes reading by the east window instead of the library fireplace. You were studying the security lights, not the books." My stomach tightened. He had noticed everything without saying a word. "You watched me." "I paid attention," he corrected quietly. "There is a difference." I wanted to argue, but I could not deny the truth hidden inside his observation. I had believed I was invisible while secretly preparing my escape. Instead, every nervous glance, every delayed answer, Every restless walk through the gardens had apparently told him the story before I ever reached the gate. He stepped closer, leaving several feet between us, never crossing the invisible line I had drawn. "Get in the vehicle, Claire." "No." The answer escaped before I even thought about it. "I am leaving." His eyes briefly closed as though he had expected that response too. "You can try." I took one careful step backward onto the empty road. The cool pavement felt strangely comforting beneath my bare feet. Nothing happened. Vincent remained exactly where he was. No guards appeared. No one grabbed my arm. The silence became almost unbearable. "Why are you not stopping me?" I finally asked. His gaze drifted toward the dark woods lining the property before returning to me. "Because if I stop you, you will believe this place is your prison forever." Confusion replaced my anger. "Then why are you here?" A faint breeze carried the scent of rain and pine between us. Vincent answered so quietly I almost missed it. "To give you one more chance to make the right decision before someone else finds you." At that exact moment, bright headlights appeared far down the highway, moving steadily toward the estate. Vincent noticed them immediately. His relaxed posture disappeared, replaced by a level of focus I had never seen before. He looked back at me, and for the first time since I had met him, there was unmistakable urgency behind his composed voice. "Claire," he said, opening the passenger door of the black SUV. "This is the last peaceful minute we are going to have tonight." The approaching headlights grew brighter until they slowed several hundred feet from the estate entrance instead of continuing forward. My breath caught as the unfamiliar SUV remained motionless beneath the rain, its engine quietly humming in the darkness. Whoever sat inside was not lost. They were waiting. Vincent never looked away from the distant vehicle. His voice stayed calm, but every word carried a weight that made my pulse quicken. "Claire, I cannot make this choice for you." I stared at him, searching for the manipulation I had convinced myself was always hiding beneath his polished manners. Instead, I found something unexpected. Patience. Not confidence that I would obey him. Confidence that reality eventually would. "If you are trying to scare me, it is not going to work," I said. He nodded slightly. "I know." That answer unsettled me even more. Rain soaked through my sweater, and the cold finally reached my skin. I wrapped my arms around myself, refusing to move closer to him. "You said I was free to leave." "You are." "Then stop telling me to get into your vehicle." Vincent released a slow breath and glanced toward the distant headlights once more. "Because once you step beyond this road, I cannot promise I will reach you first." His choice of words echoed in my mind. Reach me first. Not stop me. Not own me. Reach me. I hated that such a small difference mattered. I looked back toward the mansion behind us. 23 days earlier, I had arrived believing I had been taken into a luxurious prison. Every room had been open. Every meal had been prepared exactly the way I liked after mentioning my favorite foods only once. The staff had treated me with quiet respect instead of fear. No locked doors. No chains. No shouted orders. Yet I had still counted every hour until I could leave, because freedom without choice never felt like freedom at all. I shifted my attention back to the distant SUV. It had not moved an inch. "Who are they?" I whispered. Vincent answered immediately. "People who have been asking questions about you for nearly 2 weeks." My heart skipped. That is impossible. Nothing about this has been impossible. I wanted to dismiss him. Again, but memories surfaced one after another. The unfamiliar sedan parked across the street outside the bookstore before Vincent had brought me here. The strange phone calls that disconnected whenever I answered. The delivery driver who had stared at me a little too long outside my apartment. At the time, they had felt like ordinary coincidences. Standing beside Vincent in the rain, they suddenly fit together like pieces of a puzzle I had never realized I was solving. "Why would anyone be looking for me?" I asked. Vincent's expression remained unreadable. "That is the question I have been trying to answer since the day we met." Before I could respond, the distant SUV slowly pulled away from the shoulder and began rolling toward the entrance with deliberate patience. Vincent opened the passenger door once more without taking his eyes off the road. "I promised I would never force you into my world, Claire," he said quietly. "Tonight, I am asking you to decide whether you trust your fear of me more than your instincts." For the first time since I had met Vincent Moretti, I realized the most dangerous decision of the night might not be getting into his vehicle. It might be refusing to. My hesitation lasted only a heartbeat. but it felt long enough for the rain to wash away every ounce of certainty I had carried to the gate. I looked at the approaching sport utility vehicle, then back at Vincent. His hand remained on the open passenger door, never reaching for me, never demanding an answer. That single detail unsettled me more than anything else that had happened since the night we met. I had expected commands. Instead, he offered a choice. I hated that it made the decision harder. The distant headlights continued closing the gap with slow, deliberate confidence, as though whoever sat behind that windshield already believed they belonged on this road. I finally stepped toward Vincent's vehicle and climbed inside without saying a word. The leather seat felt cold beneath me. The door closed with a quiet click, sealing out the rain but not the questions racing through my mind. Vincent walked around the front of the vehicle, settled behind the steering wheel, and started the engine without urgency. He did not accelerate immediately. Instead, he watched the rearview mirror for several silent seconds before guiding the vehicle through the open gate and back toward the mansion. Neither of us spoke until the estate disappeared behind rows of towering pine trees. "You think I made the wrong choice," I finally whispered. Vincent kept his eyes on the winding driveway. "No." I turned toward him. "Then why do I feel like I lost?" A faint smile crossed his face before fading just as quickly. "Because sometimes walking away is easier than discovering why you wanted to leave in the first place." His answer lingered in the quiet cabin. Outside, rain traced silver lines across the windshield while the wipers swept them away in steady rhythm. I watched the lights of the mansion slowly reappear ahead of us, warm against the dark sky, looking less like a fortress and more like an old family home waiting for someone to return. That thought irritated me. I refused to let comfort rewrite reality. "You said people have been looking for me," I said. "Who are they?" Vincent remained silent for several moments. "I do not know their names yet." "You expect me to believe that? You seem to know everything." He let out a quiet breath. "I know patterns. I know timing. I know when someone begins asking questions they should not know to ask, but I do not know every answer." It was the first time I had heard uncertainty in his voice. Somehow that made him seem more human than the perfectly composed man I had imagined. We reached the circular driveway, but instead of stopping at the front entrance, Vincent continued toward a smaller stone building behind the main house. I had noticed it before from my bedroom window, but had never been inside. He parked beneath a covered entrance and stepped out first, opening my door as rain tapped softly against the roof above us. "Come with me," he said. Curiosity overcame my exhaustion. Inside, the building looked nothing like the elegant mansion. Shelves lined every wall, filled with neatly labeled boxes, old photographs, city maps, newspaper clippings, and stacks of organized files. A large table stood in the center beneath warm lights, covered with documents connected by colored strings that stretched across an enormous map of New York. Vincent walked to the table and gently placed one thin folder in front of me. Across the tab, written in clean block letters, was my full name. My pulse quickened as I slowly opened the cover, only to discover that the first page had been created nearly 6 months before I had ever met Vincent Moretti. My hands refused to move for several seconds. The folder felt strangely ordinary, nothing more than cream-colored paper and a simple label carrying my name, yet it weighed more than anything I had ever held. I slowly turned the first page. At the top sat a photograph of me leaving the elementary school where I taught art every Thursday afternoon. The date beneath it stopped my breath. It had been taken almost 6 months before I ever met Vincent. The next page contained copies of newspaper articles about a charity fundraiser where I had volunteered, followed by receipts from a neighborhood coffee shop I visited every Monday morning before work. There were handwritten notes beside each document. Routine unchanged. Travels alone. No visible surveillance until early March. I looked up at Vincent. This cannot be real. He rested both hands on the edge of the table. I wish it were not. I flipped through more pages. None of them felt invasive in the way I expected. There were no personal letters, no hidden recordings, nothing that suggested obsession. Instead, every page focused on unusual events surrounding my daily life. A delivery van parked across from my apartment 3 mornings in 1 week. An unfamiliar man photographed entering the same grocery store after I arrived. A rideshare account created using my email address, but never activated. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. Who collected all of this? I asked quietly. My security team. Why? Vincent answered without hesitation. Because someone else started watching you first. The room suddenly felt colder. I continued turning pages until I reached a city map covered with colored circles. My apartment. My workplace. My favorite bookstore. My parents' gravesite outside White Plains. Every location had dates written beside it. My voice barely worked. They followed me everywhere. Vincent nodded once. Not every day, just often enough to learn your habits. I stared at the map, remembering the strange moments I had dismissed as ordinary life. The cashier who greeted me by name before I introduced myself. The black sedan parked across the street twice in 1 week. The woman at the train station who smiled at me for far too long before walking away without boarding. I had laughed at myself for imagining things. Now those memories returned carrying an entirely different meaning. Why did you never tell me? I whispered. Vincent remained silent before finally answering. Because evidence without answers creates panic, not safety. I closed the folder and met his eyes. So you decided for me. His expression did not change. I decided to keep you alive while I searched for the truth. I wanted to argue, but the conviction behind his words made it difficult. He was not asking for gratitude. He was explaining a decision he still believed had been necessary. My attention drifted toward the enormous wall map again. Small colored pins marked dozens of locations across New York, but one section caught my eye immediately. 3 red strings connected my apartment, the estate, and an address in Brooklyn I had never seen before. What is that place? I asked. Vincent followed my gaze. For the first time that evening, hesitation crossed his face. He walked to the map, gently removed the red pin from the Brooklyn address, and held it between his fingers. That, he said quietly, is where I believe this story actually began. And if I am right, neither of us met by accident. Vincent placed the red pin back onto the map with such careful precision that it felt less like marking a location and more like reopening an old wound. I stepped closer until I could read the address beneath it. It was an abandoned warehouse district near the Brooklyn waterfront, a place I had never visited, at least not that I could remember. What happened there? I asked. He studied the map for a long moment before answering. That depends on which version of the story you believe. I frowned. There is more than one. He nodded. One version says it was nothing more than a financial meeting that ended unexpectedly. Another says someone disappeared that night without leaving a single trace. The only fact every account agrees on is that your name appeared in private conversations for the first time the following morning. My heartbeat slowed into a heavy rhythm that echoed inside my ears. That makes no sense. I had never even heard of you 6 months ago. I know, he replied. That is why I have spent every day since trying to understand why someone wanted to connect our lives. Before I could ask another question, a soft knock interrupted the silence. One of the house staff stepped inside, carrying a sealed envelope on a silver tray. This arrived 10 minutes ago, sir. Vincent accepted it with a quiet thank you, dismissed the employee, and examined the envelope without opening it immediately. There was no return address, only his name written in neat black ink. Something in his expression changed, not fear, not surprise, but recognition. He carefully unfolded the single sheet inside. His eyes scanned the page once before he handed it to me. There were only 2 sentences. The first read, "You cannot protect someone who already belongs to the past." The second was even shorter. "We know she came back tonight." My fingers tightened around the paper. They knew I returned here. Vincent slowly took the letter back. Yes. How? He looked toward one of the security monitors mounted high on the wall. Rain still covered the camera lenses outside the estate, but every entrance remained visible. Because someone has been watching this house as carefully as I have been watching you. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather. Until that moment, I had believed the estate was hidden from the world. Instead, it suddenly felt like the center of a chessboard where every move had already been anticipated by players I could not even see. Vincent folded the letter neatly and placed it inside the folder bearing my name. Tomorrow morning we leave for Brooklyn. I stared at him. You said that place is where this began. It is. Then why would we go there? His blue eyes met mine with quiet determination. Because if we continue waiting for answers to come to us, someone else will decide how this story ends. I glanced once more at the wall covered with maps, photographs, and carefully connected clues. For weeks I had believed Vincent Moretti controlled every part of my life. Standing inside that room, I realized something far more unsettling. He was not controlling the game. He was trying to solve it before whoever had started it reached us first. Sleep never came that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the guest room while rain tapped softly against the windows, replaying every conversation with Vincent until sunrise painted the sky a pale gray. By 7 o'clock, we were already on the road, leaving the estate behind in a black sport utility vehicle that blended easily into the morning traffic heading toward Brooklyn. The city slowly awakened around us. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Delivery trucks crowded narrow streets. Joggers crossed intersections with steaming cups in their hands. It looked like an ordinary Thursday, and somehow that made everything feel even stranger. Ordinary people hurried through lives untouched by the invisible questions that now followed me everywhere. Vincent drove without speaking much. Classical music played quietly through the speakers while the navigation screen counted down the remaining miles. I studied his profile instead of the road ahead. He looked exactly as composed as always, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other occasionally adjusting the route. If not for the folder resting beside him, no one would have guessed we were chasing answers tied to my life. Have you ever been afraid? I asked suddenly. He glanced at me for only a second before returning his attention to traffic. Every day. The honesty surprised me. You do not seem afraid. A faint smile appeared. Experience teaches you that fear is useful. Panic is not. His answer lingered in my thoughts as we crossed the Manhattan Bridge. 20 minutes later, we entered an aging industrial neighborhood where brick warehouses stood beside abandoned loading docks that overlooked the East River. Many buildings had been converted into art studios and furniture workshops, but others remained empty, their broken windows reflecting the cloudy morning sky. Vincent parked across the street from a weathered red brick building whose faded address matched the one marked by the red pin on his map. We stepped onto the sidewalk, and an unexpected feeling settled over me. Familiarity. I had never consciously visited this place, yet something about the cracked pavement, the rusted fire escapes, and the scent of salt carried by the river stirred memories that refused to fully surface. Do you recognize it? Vincent asked quietly. I hesitated before answering. No, but it feels like I should. He nodded without appearing surprised. We walked slowly toward the entrance. The old warehouse doors had long since been replaced with glass storefront windows. A small antique bookstore now occupied the first floor, its front display filled with vintage maps and worn leather journals. The owner, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes, looked up the moment we entered. Her smile faded the instant she saw me. She gripped the edge of the counter as though steadying herself. That cannot be, she whispered. My heart began racing. Have we met before? She looked from me to Vincent, then back again. I never forget a face, she said softly, especially one that disappeared 6 months ago. The room fell completely silent. Vincent took one careful step closer, his voice calm and respectful. Mrs. Whitaker, we only need the truth. The woman slowly reached beneath the counter and removed an old photograph sealed inside a protective sleeve. Her hands trembled as she offered it to me. I lowered my eyes to the faded image and felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Standing beside the bookstore entrance was a young woman with my face, my smile, and even the same silver necklace I had worn since college, but the date printed along the bottom had been taken exactly 1 week before I believed my ordinary life had even begun. The photograph almost slipped from my hands. I looked from the faded image to my own reflection in the bookstore window, searching for some small difference that would prove I was imagining everything. There was none. The woman in the picture had the same light brown hair resting over one shoulder, the same silver necklace catching the afternoon sun, even the same tiny smile I never realized I wore when I felt completely at peace. The only difference was the date printed beneath the photograph. 6 months earlier. Mrs. Whitaker watched my face carefully before speaking again. You came in here almost every Saturday for nearly a year, she said softly. You always bought old sketchbooks. You said the blank pages made you feel less afraid of making mistakes. I shook my head immediately. I have never been here. She smiled with quiet sadness. That is what makes this so difficult. Vincent remained beside me without interrupting. He was giving me space to hear the story from someone else instead of asking me to trust his version. Mrs. Whitaker walked toward a wooden shelf near the back of the shop and returned carrying a worn leather journal wrapped in brown paper. "You left this with me," she explained. "You said if no one came back for it within 6 months, I should destroy it." My pulse quickened. "Then why did you keep it?" Her eyes drifted toward Vincent. "Because he asked me not to." I slowly turned to him. "You knew about this?" He nodded once. "I found Mrs. Whitaker 2 weeks after you disappeared from this neighborhood. She refused to give me the journal because she promised you she would protect it. I respected that decision." "Then why now?" I asked. Before Vincent could answer, Mrs. Whitaker gently placed the journal into my hands. "Because today is exactly 6 months." The leather cover felt smooth beneath my fingertips, softened by years of use. A small silver clasp held it closed. My initials were pressed into the corner in faded gold letters. CB. There was no doubt it belonged to me. I carefully released the clasp and opened the first page. Instead of drawings or notes, only one sentence appeared in familiar handwriting that made my chest tighten. It was my handwriting. I knew every curve of every letter. The message was painfully simple. "If you are reading this, it means I forgot again." My breathing stopped. I stared at those words until they blurred together. Forgotten again. Not forgotten once. Again. What does that mean? I whispered, though I was no longer certain who I was asking. Vincent answered quietly. "I think someone has been trying to erase parts of your memory." I closed the journal, unable to process another word. Every certainty I had carried into that bookstore had quietly fallen apart. My ordinary life no longer felt ordinary. My memories no longer felt trustworthy. Even the woman I believed myself to be suddenly seemed incomplete. Mrs. Whitaker reached beneath the counter one final time and slid a small brass key across the polished wood. "You asked me to give you this only if you ever remembered to come back," she said. "You told me it opened the one place where the truth could never be rewritten." The brass key felt impossibly small resting in my palm, yet it carried more weight than every answer I had been chasing since the night I first met Vincent. I turned it over slowly, tracing the worn grooves with my thumb. Someone had used it countless times before me. Maybe I had. That thought no longer sounded impossible. Mrs. Whitaker quietly returned to arranging books, giving us the privacy to absorb everything that had happened. The bookstore settled into a peaceful silence broken only by the soft ticking of an old clock near the front window. I looked at Vincent. For weeks I had believed he was the mystery. Now I understood he had been searching for the same truth all along. "You could have forced Mrs. Whitaker to give you the journal," I said. He met my eyes with the same calm expression that had frustrated me from the beginning. "Yes, but you did not." He shook his head. "Some answers only matter if they are freely given." I glanced down at the key again. "Where does it lead?" Vincent reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and unfolded an aging city map. He placed it across the counter and pointed to a quiet street several blocks away from the bookstore. "There is an old artist's studio above a closed printing shop. The lease has remained active for years, even though no one has officially rented it. My team confirmed only one person entered that building regularly before you disappeared." My heartbeat quickened. "Me?" "Yes." We walked through Brooklyn together beneath clearing skies, the morning rain giving way to pale sunlight that reflected across the sidewalks. The city suddenly looked brighter, almost familiar. Street musicians tuned guitars outside cafes. Cyclists passed us with easy smiles. Children laughed in a nearby playground. Ordinary life continued while mine quietly transformed into something I no longer recognized. 10 minutes later, we stopped outside a narrow brick building with faded blue doors. The address matched the map exactly. Dust covered the old mailbox, but the lock beneath it looked surprisingly well maintained. My hand trembled as I slid the brass key inside. It turned smoothly on the first try. The door opened with a gentle creak, revealing a staircase leading to the second floor. Every step stirred memories that remained just beyond reach, like hearing a familiar melody without remembering the words. We entered a sunlit studio filled with canvases draped beneath white cloth, shelves lined with paint jars, and large windows overlooking the river. Everything had been left exactly as though someone expected to return tomorrow instead of 6 months later. My eyes stopped on a single easel standing near the center of the room. A completed painting rested upon it beneath a linen cover. I slowly pulled the fabric away. My breath caught. It was a portrait of Vincent, not dressed in expensive suits or surrounded by luxury, but standing quietly beneath an oak tree with an expression I had never seen before. Peaceful, hopeful. Along the bottom corner, I found my own signature beside a handwritten sentence in familiar ink. Some people build walls to keep the world out. Others build them to keep one promise alive. I turned toward Vincent, tears gathering before I could stop them. I painted this. He nodded gently. Yes. Why do I remember none of it? He stepped closer, but left enough space for me to choose the distance between us, just as he always had. I do not know yet. I looked around the studio that had once been part of my own life, then back at the man I had spent weeks trying to escape. Somewhere between the locked gate, the rain, the forgotten journal, and this hidden room, the story I believed had completely fallen apart. I finally understood the greatest prison had never been the estate or Vincent's protection. It had been the missing pieces of my own memory. This time, when I reached for his hand, it was entirely my decision, because the truth I feared most was no longer that he had been waiting for me. It was that somewhere deep inside a life I could not yet remember, I had already chosen to find my way back to him.